So today we are moving into Unit 3. We are going to be discussing functions and parameters. So let's just jump right into it. A function is a group of commands to which we have given some name. So there's lots of functions already built into Python, and we can tell what is and isn't a function by looking for a set of parentheses after a name. So the int or range have that set of parentheses afterward, and that shows that they are in fact a function. And we've been using functions for basically our whole class. With print, with int, with range, all of those are functions. And we can use functions as many times as we want once they have been created. Functions are useful because they help us to shorten our code, because anytime that we had something like some thing that we wanted to happen multiple times, some action we wanted to take over and over, we can, instead of copying and pasting that block of code, we can instead put it in a function and then just call that function. And that lets us shorten the amount of code that we have written. And like I said, it lets us reuse that code without having to copy and paste it. And it generally just makes our code a little bit more readable, which is always nice. So there are 5 pieces that we need to create a new function. First, we need the def keyword. Def is short for define. We're going to be defining a new function. We need a name. This is going to be following the same rules as variable names. So it should be all lowercase. We should have an underscore. You can't start with a number. All of the same rules we learned about for variables. We are going to have a set of parentheses. We're going to have a colon, and we remember a colon from our if. Anytime we see a colon, the next stuff is going to be indented. So our code inside of our function is indented to show, hey, this is in a function, it is indented. So in my function does something, I'm going to print whoa. Very exciting, very groundbreaking function here. So like a variable, you need to define your function before you can actually use it. And because of this, the optimal place to define our functions is at the top of our programs, and then we can have all of the rest of our code be underneath. Now, this isn't a rule set in stone. Python's not going to break if you intermingle stuff, but placing your functions at the top of your code, 1, makes your code more readable, which is always good. And 2, it helps us kind of localize where stuff is supposed to go, because if you kind of go back and forth between declaring a function or defining a function and writing code and back and forth, it's kind of hard to tell what is where. So if we put all of our function definitions at the top and then put all the rest of our code at the bottom, we know what things are in what place, which is good for making our code more readable. I'm realizing I have not stopped for questions. Any questions on anything I've talked about so far? Cool. All right. So something to be aware of is that the code inside of the function definition will not be run when the interpreter, which is the program that reads our Python code and runs it, when the interpreter reads those lines of code, they're not going to be run that first time. They're only going to run when you call your function. And calling a function is the word for when I'm telling the function to do its thing. So I can call a function just by saying its name, and I need to make sure I have those parentheses so that I know that this is in fact my does something function, and I'm not trying to reference a variable called does something. So if I have my does something function that prints whoa, I can call does something, prints whoa. I could even do another does something with my parentheses, and it would print whoa again. I can call my method or my function however many times I want, and it will continue doing its actions. Now, printing whoa is not a super interesting capability, but we'll get into more, applications here. So that is how I call a function with no information being sent to it. So with nothing inside of those parentheses. If I want to send some information to my function, what I can do is I can add something called a parameter. These are also called attributes in a variety of different scenarios. So parameter, attribute, those words are interchangeable with each other. So parameters are pieces of information that we can give to our functions when we call them. When we are defining our own functions, we can make them accept parameters by placing the name of the parameter inside of the parentheses like this. So I'm going to be creating a variable here. I'm naming my variable x. So within my function now, I can print x. I can print whatever value is held within that parameter. So now I can print does something 10, and that will, in my output box, it'll print 10. If I call does something and I pass hey, pretend that is how the letters are supposed to look, then my output will say hey. Whatever information I put in my parentheses here is going to get saved into that variable x when my function is running. I keep almost saying the word method because that is the word for this idea in my Java class, and the word is very stuck in my head right now. So function, method, they're also called, there's another word, starts with a P. Can't remember off the top of my head. It'll come back to me. So when I pass a parameter, the value in that variable can be used inside of my function. When we say that a function is going to accept a parameter, we are enabling immediate use of that variable within our function. It will automatically have data inside when we are inside the function because we will pass information from down where we call the function. We'll pass, that's the word for sending information through a parameter. So we pass parameters to our functions when we call them, and then any information from the function call will get sent to our function definition. So when we run our code in our function, we have access to the information inside those variables. Does that make sense so far? Sweet. We can make our functions accept more than one parameter by placing multiple variable names separated by commas inside the parentheses on the definition line. So if I want to print the sum of two numbers, num1 and num2, I can print the sum of two values. My num1 and my number 1 is going to be 10. I'm going to pass in order, essentially. My first parameter is going to go to num1. My second parameter is going to go to num2. The official words for these are my formal parameters. And down here, I have my actual parameters. I don't think you'll need to know that vocabulary. This is just bonus vocabulary. I remembered the other word for a function, procedure. I believe on the AP principles test, they are referred to as procedures rather than functions or methods. So there you go. So we've got our two parameters being passed. I can also, instead of passing literal values, I can pass the values stored inside of variables. So whatever value is in num1 is going to get sent to this num1. Whatever value is in num2 is going to get sent to this num2. It's just a hodgepodge of lines up there. Now, keep in mind, this num1 and this num1 are separate because of an idea called scope, which we're not going to talk about right now. But you can have a variable with the same name outside of a function and within a function, and they're not going to interact with each other. I'm throwing 1910 in. All right, does passing multiple parameters make sense so far? Yes? Cool. All right. So when your function accepts multiple parameters, the values, when you pass them, they're going to be passed in order. So even though I have my variables named num1 and num2, I have num1 and num2, even though I'm passing num2 comma num1, my first parameter is going to get put into the first slot. So the value in num2, the value 2, is going to get saved into num1. And the value in num1, 4, is going to get saved into my second slot. So that's 4. Now, for this method, that doesn't change anything because I'm just adding them and printing them. But just keep in mind that the order that you pass them is the order they will be received in your method. Sometimes we can call the same function with different numbers of parameters. So we haven't discussed this function in particular, but let's say we have some circle function. It's going to draw a circle on our screen, and we can pass 1, we can pass 2, or we can pass 3 parameters. We can create functions that do that. We can create functions that take different numbers of values. In order to make a parameter be optional in Python, we need to give it a default value. We need to give it some value to take when that slot isn't filled during the function call. So if I have my print sum function again, I've got num1 and I've got num2. I've still got my 2 parameters, but if my second slot doesn't get a value when I call my method, I'm just going to take this default value. We're only going to take the default value if that slot isn't filled though. So if I print the sum of 10 and 4, 10 is going to go to num1, 4 is going to go to num2. When I add them together, I will get 14. When I just pass one parameter though, 8 is going to get saved into num1. And since there is no value for num2, num2 is going to take its default value. It's going to take that value of 0, num1 plus num2, 8 plus 0 is going to equal 8. So this lets us call our functions in different ways depending on different situations. Does optional parameters make sense? Cool. All right, we'll go more in depth on this. So if your function does include optional parameters, all non-optional, all required parameters need to come first in your function's definition. So on the last slide, I had it correct. I had my non-optional parameter first and my optional parameter second. If I try to put my optional parameter first and I only give one value here, which parameter am I trying to fill? Does Python know? Do we know? I don't know. So really what we just need to make sure that all of our required parameters come first all of our optional parameters come afterward. And we can have as many parameters be required or optional as we want, but as soon as you start having optional parameters, all of the rest of your parameters have to be optional. You can't go back to having required parameters after you have an optional one. You can go back and add another parameter before your optional ones, but you can't go back and forth. Just a thing to be aware of is the order here does matter. All right, and just like when I use multiple parameters normally, optional parameters will be filled in from left to right according to the definition of our function. So if I sum vowels with no parameter, what is my sum going to be? Sam, you are absolutely correct. It's going to be 0 because I'm not getting a value for num1, so I take 0. Not getting a value for num2, so I get 0. Not getting a value for num3, so I get 0. 0 plus 0 is 0 is always going to be 0. All right, if I sum vowels with just 9, which of my 3 parameters is going to take a value?
Num1.
Num1. So num1 is going to get the value 9. Num2 there did not get a value, so we're going to take our default. We get 0. Num3 also wasn't given a value, so we take our default 0. 9 plus 0 is just 9. And it's going to follow along. I'll follow along like that. Some values of 9 and 2. 9 is going to go to num1. 2 is going to go to num2. Num3 still didn't get a value, so it's still going to be 0. We're going to take our default value. 9 plus 2 is going to give us 11. And our last one, we are actually providing a value for all 3. So we get 9, 2, and 8. And that's going to give us 19. So does optional parameters, is that all clear? Is that all track? Cool. All right. We're going to practice this, so let me know if you have any questions. It is possible to use optional parameters out of order. When I'm using optional parameters, I am allowed to say I want to give a value to this specific parameter. So you're going to use the name of the parameter, and you're going to say what you want it to equal. So num3 now will equal 5, and I didn't give a value for num1 or 2, so both of those are going to take their default 0. And here, I'm calling the same function with all of my numbers out of order, but since I have I'm saying num2 is going to equal 3, num2 is going to equal 3, num3 is going to equal 10, num1 is going to equal 2. I'm saying which parameter is going to take which value. So if we want to pass things out of order for whatever reason, we can, as long as we name which parameter is going to get which value. Make sense? Cool. All right, and that is our presentation for today. So I'm going to stop sharing. That actually covered 2 modules. So that covered modules, I believe, 5.1 and 5.2.